WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by JW Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on the air. I'm JW Simmons, your host, who come to you each and every week. We're also simulcast on WCLN Radio, Star Communication, Cable Channel 16, and also today we have a guest that I think you know the name. His name is Greg Fishel. Greg, thank you for being with us today. Sometimes I think folks that have your notoriety maybe need to introduce me. It might work better.
I don't know. I hear you're pretty well known down here.
Well, I don't know. But anyway, I want to kind of dial people in. You are somebody, and you're a very modest person, but you're an Emmy Award-winning weather forecaster, certified as one of the first American television meteorologists. Did I get that right?
You did, and I always like to qualify that a little bit. I was on the AMS, American Meteorological Society, board for broadcasting, and the head of the board came to me a couple months later and said, would you like to be the head guy to create an exam that we'll use for certification? Because up until that time, all you had to do was send 3 tapes in of 3 shows, and the evaluators sort of guessed as to whether or not you really knew what you were talking about. And so we wanted to, ramp that requirement up a little bit. And so I had 9 or 10 different people, university professors, other broadcast meteorologists, all sorts of people that helped me with that. And they came to me at the end of the process and they said, as a thank you, we'd like to make you the first one to be certified. Wow. And I at first said, well, I don't really know if that's fair because, I had a lot of help here, but they insisted. And sometimes when somebody gives you a gift, if you keep refusing it, then they're offended.
Exactly.
And so I finally said, okay, but just know that every time somebody brings this up, I'm going to give credit to all of the other people that were involved in this process. And
rightfully so. I mean, to me, the creation and origin of something is a huge application of not only capability, but expertise. And also you've written some of the, or actually published the exams that are done. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and we tried to diversify the topics in the exam, like some of it was weather forecasting, some of it was theory. And I think that it's important to be able to attain or retain some of this mathematical knowledge, because when you're in college getting a degree in meteorology, it's basically 4 years of calculus and physics. The first 2 years is in general, and then the last 2 years is specifically applied to the weather. And no, you don't use that every day in your forecasting life, but I still think it's good to retain the fundamentals so that you never forget what you do every day, where it came from.
Yeah. When I look at it, and of course I look back at 1979 with WMDT and some of the early starting stages, and then your movement to WRAL, which really kind of seeded, I think, your total career and decades of service in meteorology. How far have we come, Greg, in the science from that time until 2023? And has that movement, for folks like you that are considered scientists, what kind of clarity has that put on the lens of understanding things?
Oh, gosh. I can probably go through 2 or 3 things right off the bat. Radar, for instance. When I first got to WRAL, we had a dedicated phone line to the radar out at the RDU airport. And it was very low resolution, and it had no Doppler capabilities. It couldn't see the movement of raindrops. It just could tell you the raindrops were there. Then, as we got into the 90s, we were able to not only see the raindrops or detect them, but see how they were moving. And, if you look at a merry-go-round with a bunch of kids, if half of them are coming toward you and half of them are going away from you, they're spinning in a circle. And so you look for raindrops moving in opposite directions right next to each other, and that tells you where the rotation is. And we could never do that before Doppler radar came along. So that's huge. the resolution of the computer models has just gone out of sight from, think of it this way, that if you have a camera and you're taking a picture of 4 houses across the lake, if it's a low resolution camera, those 4 houses look like one. If it's a high resolution camera, you can see each one of the houses with detail. Wow. And so in these models, it used to be that we were looking at 4 houses as one, and now we can see all the different houses, So
if it's like 3 or 4 tornadoes, you could literally differentiate to some degree.
Right. And, so that's been huge. Satellite detection, in other words, the satellites do an incredible job now of filling in the holes between all the places that launch weather balloons. And so all that data is then going into the models and making them even better than they've been before. So yeah, it's an entirely different world. And I got to be honest with you, when I was at Penn State, we had to hand plot the weather maps. The data would come off a teletype, a Western Union teletype, and a code. And then we'd rip that off and sit down with a blank map of the eastern U.S. and hand plot every single one of those observations. And it took about an hour to do that. But man, did you know that data by the time you were done? Because it had to come up off the paper, through your eyes, into your brain, down your arm, onto that map.
You had to see it and feel it.
Yes. And yes, the computers do all that for you now, and most times that's fine. But if there's a bad observation, I would argue that it's tougher to see when everything is done for you than if you nitpicked it all the way down that list and you say, hey, there's something wrong with that.
Yeah. and somehow, and just listen to you, that I think in cases with technology, there's always these things that we refer to as glitches. If a glitch comes, you might miss something because you're not able to immediately decipher the glitch.
Right. Oh, exactly. And there were actually a couple of times when, this was many, many years ago, but there was something extraordinary going on down in the Gulf of Mexico, and the model simply blew up. Wow. And they sent out a note, saying that, it simply can't handle this situation, and, we're not going to have a model output today. But basically, these models are mathematical representations of everything we know about the atmosphere, from physics to thermodynamics to the whole bit. And differential equations cannot be solved exactly. And so they have to approximate, and they're very good approximations, but there's always going to be a small amount of error. And those errors usually increase as you go out farther and farther into the future. And so in order to get around that, in recent years, we've used something called ensembles, where we take the analysis that goes into the model and we change it just a teeny little bit to 50 different extents. And then we run all those 50 versions and we see how much variance there is in the solutions. If they're all similar, then you can say, okay, the atmosphere is not that sensitive to those little changes at the beginning. But if they're all over the place and it looks like a finger painting exercise, then you know that there's low confidence in that forecast, that a teeny change could make a huge difference. And I think people appreciate it when you're honest with them. There were times I looked right into the camera and said, folks, I honestly don't know how this is going to play out.
Yep, you sure have.
And here are the most likely options, but, this is a high uncertainty forecast. And instead of people saying, oh, well, a trained ant could say that, I think they appreciated the honesty.
I agree. And oftentimes when you would say that, you could possibly turn to another meteorologist or weather forecaster, I would say, and they may be saying, yeah, I can tell you this is what's going to happen right now and that kind of thing. And I think that's where, as chief meteorologist, you kind of got a reputation of being honest and straightforward.
I hope so. That was my attempt. And Mike Mays and I, it's probably like the last 25 years that I was there, worked the same shift. And we had this little plan where he would prepare a forecast independently, no input from me or anybody else. I would prepare a forecast independently with no input from anybody else. And then we'd get together after that and compare notes. And there were some times that he noticed things that I didn't, and there were times I noticed things that he didn't. And so we would feed off each other. And the philosophy that all of us had in that office was that there is no one person in here that knows, that has the answer. That consensus is always the best way to go. And so we would leave notes for each other, like for the next shift. And everybody was always in touch with what everybody else was thinking. And I liked that because I didn't want to, just because I had chief in front of my name, say, okay, this is the way it's going to be. This is what I think, and that's what we're going to go with. Right. No, because there are times when other people have better ideas.
When you left WRAL, it seems I recall, and I don't know whether I saw this on a podcast or something. I remember reading something that you made the statement that you felt good leaving that station with the guidance of Mike May.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And, Elizabeth Gardner has been there forever. In fact, she was just recognized. I can't remember the exact name of the award, but I think it was like that she was really helping women to advance in science. Yeah. So she's been there ever since the 90s. Amy Wilmoth has been there for, several years now. One of the things that made WRAL unique in my mind was that television business is typically rather transient. I mean, people jump around every couple of years to a new station. And we had people there that were there for, 15, 20, 25. Tom Suter was there, I think, 40 years, And I think that said a lot about the company. The people wanted to be there.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to follow that thread a little bit because I want to kind of look at the personality and the relationship that you developed with masses of people that still kind of hold a lot of confidence. We'll be back in a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We're talking with Greg Fishel. We're talking about not only today being a beautiful day, but all the days that are sunny days and some of the rainy days. We'll be back in a moment.
Providing fewer commutes, more backyard offices, and crystal clear meetings. Providing less, you froze up, and more presence in your presentations. Providing a better internet experience. Providing possible.
You're out for an evening on the town. Finally a chance to relax and forget that you left your front door completely unlocked. Fortunately, you just installed a security system from Star Communications. With just your cell phone, you can check on your house, lock it down, light it up, and get back to relaxing.
You forgot to put Buster in his crate.
Unfortunately, we can't help with that. Security and automation from Star Communications. Call today to find out more.
Most aging adults want to stay in their homes as long as possible. And as your loved ones get older, you want to support them, even when you can't be there. Star is proud to offer Star Alert. This new system is now mobile and has GPS compatibility, so your loved ones can live their lives and you can have peace of mind, knowing they can get the help they need with just the simple push of a button. The new Star Alert also offers automatic fall detection, so help will be alerted even if they can't press the button. Call and ask about Star Alert today.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us today. My name is JW Simmons. The show is called We Should Know. It's based on information. It's based on education, and we hope we're doing that. And one person that has really been educating us over the years, should I say decades, is Greg Fishel.
Centuries.
It's one of them things. We kind of get on a roll here, and as before we went on air, I told you it's kind of a conversation thing. So I think I feel comfortable in saying that you have developed a bonding relationship with a lot of people. And so when you decided to leave Channel 5 and do other things, it's like that flock kind of continued to follow you. Let's talk about that. And it's a pretty substantial group of people. I mean, I look online, I'm going, well, I know that person. They just responded to something Greg said. Mm-hmm. How do you, it's like you can't walk away from this.
Well, I want to go back and tell you something that an awful lot of people don't know. I was a huge introvert for the first 30 years of my life.
Hard to believe.
It's true. And I didn't want it. When I first got into TV, I did not want to be recognized. When I went into a public place, I would purposely look at the floor to avoid eye contact. And when Bob DeBartoleben decided to retire in 1989, they offered me his position, and I initially turned it down. And my argument was, if I can't handle the notoriety that I get on weekends, being primetime is going to put me in the ground, you know?
Yeah.
So about, 2, 3, 4 weeks later, I started thinking to myself, is this one of those opportunities the good Lord's put in my lap, and I'm going to look back in 20 years and wonder what if? And so I went back to the general manager, who was John Green at the time, and I said, can we try this for like a year? And if you hate me, you can get rid of me. And if I don't like you, I can leave. And he said, sure. And so there was a day not long after that I walked into a grocery store. I think it was an A&P. If you remember back that far.
Yeah, I sure do.
And I decided that I was going to look straight ahead. And if I made eye contact with somebody, I was going to say hi to them before they said anything to me. That day changed my life.
How about that?
And it got to the point where when I was going to talk to a group, instead of being scared, like, what if they don't like me? I thought of it as, I get to meet 50 new friends today.
Absolutely.
And the irony about the social media thing is I did not like social media when it first came along. I just wanted to do TV and not mess with any of that.
Wow.
Because I thought that we were, people would say, oh, well, you need to make them feel like you're part of your family. Well, I'm not. I mean, I'm glad they feel like that, but they have their, blood people, and I have my blood people, So the irony is I never liked that when I was in television, and it has become my lifeline since I left.
Wow.
Who would have thought?
That's exactly. It completely was reversed.
Yes. It was a 180. And so now, it's sort of fun to interact with people and see what they think about things. And then this Patreon thing, which a lot of people don't know about. I was having dinner with my 2 sons last July, and they said, Dad, you've still got a pretty large following. You got to look into this. I didn't even know what Patreon was.
Yeah. So
it turns out it's a thing where you produce a product and you charge a subscription fee for it. And so I said, okay, I'll do a video Monday through Friday, and I'll charge $3 a month for that. And then I'll do 2 bonus weather education videos a week. And if somebody wants that, then it's an extra $2 and it's $5 a month. So now I've got, I think, a little over 800 subscribers.
Wow.
And I'm still finding out that a lot of people don't know about it. But
I'm doing the math in my head here while you're talking. That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Well, and it's about half and half. Like half of them just do the 3 and half of them do the 5. But,
yeah.
But if you go to patreon.com/fishweather, all one word, then it'll take you to my page. And I know a lot of people have an adversity to paying for information that's always been free. But I go into a lot of detail. I mean, these videos are on average like 8 or 9 minutes long. And I do the forecast at the beginning. So if that's all you want,
that's all you get.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you want the behind the scenes things and so forth, that comes right after that, and you're free to stick around. So I try to make it so that no matter what your interest level is, you get what you want fairly quickly.
Yeah. So I mean, for like $20 a month, you could say, listen, I've got a meteorologist that I kind of have personal look at here that's talking to me. And you don't get that.
And when I first got into television, the television stations hire consultants that tell them how to do their job. And one of the things they told me early on is the public doesn't want to be educated. They just want to know if it's going to rain or not. And I never accepted that. And I just ignored that advice. And I had so many people over the years come up to me and say, Greg, the reason we watch you is that you teach.
Yeah.
And that meant more to me than anything in the world.
And I think we need more of that, Greg. When I think about the concept of folks, giving folks information is one thing, but educating them enlightens them and causes them to see something differently.
And don't you think it also empowers them?
It does.
The more you, because then they might be able to, if they're not near a radio or a TV, they might be able to look at the sky and say, oh, now I know what that means.
Absolutely.
And I can make my own forecast.
Absolutely. Do you miss that that Channel 5 environment, the TV environment itself? Is there a piece of that that you just really liked? You just talked about being the introvert, and then you found a way out of that box. Would you like to get back on the screen somewhere in some kind of TV setting? Is that something that would excite you? Or would that be something you'd be willing to play in, should I say?
The thing I love about what I'm doing now is that, and there were two crew members that I am very good friends with, Tim King and Al Robinson. And so they would stand next to the camera when my 3 minutes was up, then they'd go like this, and I couldn't just keep going, because if I did, then I was cutting into the time of people that came after me.
Absolutely.
The thing I love now is that, and I try not to take advantage of this, but I can talk as long as I want. If I need to make an extra point, I've got the time to do that. So I think the thing I miss the most is the people, because you don't stay at a place as long as I stayed there without meeting an awful lot of nice people and an awful lot of very talented people.
You were there
37
years. I was thinking it was close to 40.
Yeah.
And that's like you become bonded with people.
Yeah, with the station, with the community, the whole bit.
Yeah.
I remember like all the years that, we had a booth out at the state fair, and, you get a chance to meet a lot of people. And that changed, with cell phones and so forth.
Yeah.
Then people didn't just want autographs, they wanted pictures. And so that was another thing that changed from the early days to the latter days.
Absolutely. and that process itself has changed along with the degree of technology that we talked about. So to have the access to somebody that's got your background and expertise would seem to me to be interesting and of interest to industry leaders and others, especially when you're looking at weather patterns.
Yep. And I got to tell you, I was so fortunate that North Carolina State University was literally right across the street from the station, the weather building. And I got to know a lot of the faculty, and Gary Lackman, who is still there. We've been friends over 20 years, and he has been, in a sense, my mentor, because he's one of those guys that knows the theory backwards and forwards, but he wants to apply it. He doesn't want to live in this ivory tower and not test the real world. He wants to get out there. And so when weather situations came up that were challenging, one of us would call the other one, and we'd exchange ideas. And I told all the professors over there, I said, look, if you ever watch me on television and you hear me say something that isn't scientifically accurate, don't sit around the water cooler and discuss it amongst yourselves. Call me, email me.
Yeah.
Yes. Because I said, I sort of feel like those of us in broadcasting are representing the science of meteorology. And we don't want to represent it poorly. Right. So I almost feel like in a ways I got a partial master's degree through apprenticeship. Just by hanging out. If you look
at the time and the connectivity, you probably do. One of the things I want to kind of get into as we come up on this next segment is this idea of relationships and building that relationship. I know you had a great relationship with Nick Petro, National Weather Service. He's been in that seat, and we always bring him in to just talk about before hurricane season and some of the things we're looking at. And I don't want to kind of get an idea of how that relationship bonded you, because I know he mentioned you a couple of times when I had him on the show.
Okay.
And that relationship, and how the Weather Service, the National Weather Service, works with network TV stations. I always found that interesting because I could never tell whether it was they were talking about the Weather Service's radar or whether it was actually the TV station's radar. And then something came out called dual Doppler.
Right.
And I'm thinking, oh my gracious, does that mean there's two of them, or is it all in the same thing, that one? So that's kind of I guess a piece going forward that could be a benefit to folks that are listening and or watching the show. Just help them understand how that net works together and how that helps you as a meteorologist do your job. Even now as you do your job, because it sounds like what you just told us is that you're still a meteorologist putting out scientific information that sometimes people, as you pointed out, do not have the time or bandwidth to receive because somebody's over there doing this, which means you're fixing to get cut off. So we'll take that in counter, and then we'll take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll kind of look at that. I think that would be interesting to folks.
Sure.
And then anywhere you want to go, as we talked about before. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break. As we go to break, I want to remind you, if you would, call a friend as we're working through this process. I want everybody, as much as they can, to give us your feedback on the show with Greg today. A lot of folks follow him now. A lot of folks hopefully will pick up and follow him as he goes forward. But this is interesting, and weather affects everybody, so stay tuned.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of light. Just because something may work doesn't mean it's right for your business. Let Star Communications' knowledgeable consultants help you customize a hosted voice system that's right for you. Our dedicated experts work with you to understand your business needs and guide you at every step, from choosing and installing services to ongoing maintenance and support. Contact Star today.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're coming up on segment 3 today. We're talking with Greg Fishel. And if you're just maybe turn your car on, driving down the road and picked us up on the radio, we're talking about weather. The name Greg Fishel and weather forecasting has some sense of synonymous to it. It's like when they hear your name, they go, okay, we're going to find out what's going on with the weather. I want to kind of follow up on some of the inside scoop. And you and I have a friend, Nick Petro, who works with the National Weather Service. That's been a regular on our show for some time. How much does TV stations and broadcasters, the job you used to do for close to 40 years, how much do they depend on the National Weather Service?
Oh, a tremendous amount. And I want to take you back to, there's a very well-known private consulting firm called AccuWeather. And it was born in the office of a graduate student named Joel Myers at Penn State back in the early 60s.
Your alma mater.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he was very vocal about the fact that he wanted to start a company that would compete with the National Weather Service. And I sort of got into that mode for a while in college, and even my first years out of college, that doggone it, I wanted to compete and beat them, you know. And now I look back and I realize how incredibly immature that was. And then the National Weather Service modernized back in the late 80s, and they created a new position called the Science Operations Officer. And so the Raleigh office is recognized as one of the best in the country. And they do research, they publish papers, and once all of that happened, then I, really realized that, hey, we're all in the same business. We're trying to forecast the weather as best we can for as many people as we can. And again, they're going to have ideas about things that I didn't, okay? And so why can't we work together as a team as opposed to thinking of this as being a competition type thing? And I felt a lot better about myself and the relationship once I, headed in that direction. And Nick, he just did something for me recently where there's a chat room called NWS Chat. And all the TV stations all the meteorologists have it, and they get access to the warnings as soon as they're issued,
Wow.
bang.
Yeah.
And so when I first applied to get back into that, I was declined, and he went to bat for me and said, yeah, he's not on television anymore, but he's still a media partner.
That's right.
And they reversed their decision, and I was able to get back on that. So I just sort of feel like, we're all friends now. And, and of course, there's been a lot of changes over the years with the Weather Service in terms of who was heading up the office. But, I still think of all of them as just being my friends and not my competitors.
and that piece of science is there for the taking, and working with any of the TV stations. And as you just pointed out, even though you're in private sector now, you still have access to that same information. So when you're doing your forecasting in the private sector, you have literally the same kind of things you had when you were with WREL.
Right. And got an ice cube in my mouth.
Let's go ahead. That's fine.
All of the data collection, like the weather balloons, the surface weather observations, all of that is collected by the government. And so if they didn't do that, the private sector wouldn't exist, because the private sector does not collect their own observations, or at least not for the most part. They dibble and dabble in it, but the vast majority of it is government. And And there, I know people on television that try to use the National Weather Service radar and call it their own. Okay,
that's one of the reasons I wanted to ask this question, because I've heard that.
It's like our radar shows.
Yeah,
it's not your radar; it's the National Weather Service radar. And the thing about it is, even when we bought our first radar, the main reason we bought it is that in the early days of the National Weather Service Doppler radar, they would do what's called a volume scan, where they would spin around at a low elevation, tilt up, spin around, tilt up, spin around. Well, it took 6 minutes to do that, and we didn't get a new update of the lowest level for 6 minutes. Well, if you have a tornado moving at 60 miles an hour, and you're 6 minutes off in terms of how recent the image is, that's 6 miles off.
Wow.
And so you're sitting there saying, okay, the tornado's here, and no, it's it's way down there somewhere. So we didn't look at it as competing with them, because they had a radar that was more powerful than us. It had less problems with what we call attenuation, where if it had to go through one big thunderstorm to see the one on the other side of it, it was much better at that than ours was. And so we looked at it as a way to complement an already very, very good product, that they had. But yeah, there's a lot of times when, the management, not WRAL, but other stations will say, no, don't say the National Weather Service Doppler radar, because that makes it look like we're dependent on somebody.
Yeah.
Well, you are.
Exactly. Why not say that?
And why not look at that as being an asset and not a drawback?
And I know you probably saw this weather reporter in Mississippi recently with the tornadoes coming through 90 miles, about 3/4 of a mile wide, multiple tornadoes. But the TV camera showed him, and I thought about you. He was just literally. He said, "Oh no!" It was his conversation was. He was just looking at the data. He was looking at the screen, and finally, his young guy stopped, and he said a prayer.
Wow.
And I don't know whether you saw that or not.
I did not.
It was worth. In fact, I looked at it 2 or 3 times. I thought, I don't think I've ever seen that before. But he basically, I think his prayer was. He went through several verbiage things there. Oh no, and he said, stopped, and he said, Jesus, please help them. And I was like, whoo, I got chills. I had never seen that before.
Right.
Is that moments that actually happen sometimes if you're looking at data and homes are being destroyed?
Oh yeah, and there were times like with Hurricane Fran back in it was 96 that we had no idea how bad it was until several hours into the event. And the tornado outbreak in 1984, that was especially true because the first ones that hit Maxton and Laurinburg and Red Springs knocked out the National Weather Service's communication tower.
Wow.
And so the NOAA weather radio was gone. And so they used us because we had a statewide radio network. Then they used us to try to get the warnings out, that way to as many people as they could. But there are times when, in fact, I can remember in '84, the 2 days before that, me saying that I was really concerned that something bad was going to happen. And by about 9 o'clock that night, we didn't have any reports of anything all that bad. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've totally blown this out of proportion.
Yeah.
And then by the next morning, we went from no reports to 59 people dead.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I thought I didn't do enough.
Yeah. Do you ever know the balance? Where is that line? Is it better to project something of more gravity or back off and take a chance? Where's that line at?
I think that line has moved for me over the years. I do not like hype. I just don't. I think you can convey seriousness to a situation without making everything sound like the world's coming to an end.
Right.
I think, and the thing about it is, there are some situations that are what I call low probability, high impact events, where, the chance may not be that high of it happening, but if it does, the impact is going to be huge. And I think people need to know that, because sometimes they say, oh, he said it's only a 20% chance, I'm not going to worry about it. Well, 20% is not zero. And if it does happen and it's going to be the difference between life and death, then I think you take that in a different way than if it's a 20% chance of something that you can live with anyways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And that devastation becomes personal, just like this reporter in Mississippi. Again, a young guy, and I was just transfixed. I had to look at it twice. And in fact, I think that some other stations replayed his comment.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was just that. I'm sure you can go online and pull it up, but it was one of those things that, for folks in your position, it does create a weight of, I'm talking to hundreds of thousands of people, and they are depending on you.
And do you know that over the years, I tried very hard not to think of it that way, because that's a lot of pressure.
It is.
I would look at Tim or Al or whoever was on the crew, and I would just pretend that I was talking to them. And that made it a lot easier for me to do my job. But I would tell kids that were interning with us that wanted to go into broadcasting, I said, don't think about the fact that there's 300,000 people out there watching you. I said, that'll drive you crazy.
Absolutely.
But just think of the camera as being your friend. And you just got home from school and your mom or dad said, in 3 minutes, give me a summary of your day.
Wow.
And you were the star of that show, so you have no problem filling up that 3 minutes. Yeah. And so I tried to look at it that way, that I was simply sharing with people what I had learned that day. And that made it a lot less intimidating than the other way.
I think one of the things that we're coming up on the last segment of the show, I'd like to maybe take a break from this segment, go to the last segment, but bring people back in. And I want to know, this is the question I want to know, is what's Greg Fishel's forecast going forward in the future with weather conditions on this thing that we call a planet, that we call home? There seems to be not only controversy, but there clearly seems to be things changing radically. And I just want to get your thoughts on that. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We're talking with Greg Fishel. We're coming up on the last segment. Call a friend. We'll be back in one moment.
Experiencing slow internet? If you have a fast internet package, the problem is most likely your wireless router. With more devices using Wi-Fi, your wireless router may not be able to deliver the speed and coverage you need. We now have the leading solution to enhance your internet experience. Using small devices in a mesh network, these Wi-Fi appliances cover just about any size home, so that all your devices can operate to their fullest potential. Whole home Wi-Fi from Star Communications. Get the most out of your internet connection.
Eastern North Carolina is a beautiful place where we gladly choose to call home, and we strive to provide the best communications services. STAR is committed to improving communications to all our service areas because we want to improve the communities where we not only work, but also live. STAR Communications. We are neighbors serving neighbors.
Star 16 is your channel for local announcements, event information, and scenic camera views from surrounding areas. Enjoy local programming such as At the Table and the We Should Know Show, along with other special community presentations. Star 16, bringing the local community to your living room.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us today. And remember, I really appreciate your commentary sent to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. Also, anything you want to mail to us, suggestions, comments, you can send them to the Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina. Each and every week, we bring you a new subject, a new topic. Some of those things that you have recommended to us, we try to follow up on them and try to get more information for you and push it out to the population in general. Thank you for your support and continued support over the years. Today, we're talking with Greg Fishel. Greg, this is our last segment, and again, thank you for taking time to sit down and talk to us. And you know, I've hoped to get you to come back to Clinton and let me show you around a little bit. Maybe you'll fall in love with the area and do like I did, move back here after you moved away and decided to stay. So, but I wanted to kind of hit this segment straightforward with your predictions and your thoughts going forward. Climate change, a lot of emphasis is being pushed with vehicular changes, carbon-free, green energy. Where are we headed with that, and is it too little too late?
Well, I know some people know this, you may or may not, but I was a skeptic for 30 years.
I read that.
And people say, well, what piece of data was it that changed your mind? It wasn't. It was a realization that I was allowing my political ideology at the time to dictate my opinion about a science issue, and that was wrong. Why would a scientist not take a scientific approach to a science issue? Mm-hmm. So once I started reading the peer-reviewed literature and I got a chance to interview some of the top scientists in the world that are specialists in this area, mm-hmm. it became very difficult for me to make the argument that we weren't having an effect. Maybe we could still argue about how much, but to say that, you know, I hear people say, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, because I was born and raised in a Christian home and I remain a Christian to this day. Mm-hmm. But when I hear people say, God controls the climate, my answer to that is, the way I see it, is that he created a flawless system on day one, mm-hmm. whenever that was.
Right.
And he has allowed it to evolve and perform in a very majestical way ever since. I don't think he has a board meeting every day saying, okay, let's put a low over Missouri and a high over Montana. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The system works on its own. Mm-hmm. And we have the ability, unfortunately, to modify that. I mean, we've learned about what gases in the atmosphere intercept outgoing radiation and send it back to the Earth. Mm-hmm. Carbon dioxide, methane, water vapor. Mm-hmm. This is an interesting fact. Carbon dioxide makes up less than 1% of the atmosphere. But if it didn't exist in its natural state, the Earth would be an uninhabitable ice ball.
Wow.
The planet would be 60 degrees Fahrenheit colder than it is now. And so if something that small can be the difference between life and death on this planet, doesn't it make sense that if you double that, that has the chance to have an even more extreme effect?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, this has become a political football, mm-hmm. you know, back and forth. And there are people on both sides that I think take things to an extreme. Mm-hmm. For instance, every time there's an unusual weather event, you can't blame that on climate change. The weather has been doing weird stuff ever since time began. Mm-hmm. The challenge in our science is to try to separate out the natural cycles in the weather, the natural variability, and then see what's left. And the thing that makes this situation different, it's been warmer than it is now. We've had more CO2 in the air than we have now. The climate has changed over the years. All those things are true. But we haven't seen this degree of change over such a short time period, that these other changes occurred over tens of thousands of years.
Right.
And now we're seeing significant change over a much shorter time period. So supposing that and by the way, I also have heard the argument that, they changed the name from global warming to climate change because it wasn't doing what they thought it was going to do. That's bull, okay? The reason that they changed the name is that they were finding out that the impacts of the warming went far beyond just temperature, that it affected precipitation, intensity of hurricanes, all this stuff. So global warming didn't really capture all of that, whereas climate change does. And that's the reason that terminology was changed. It had nothing to do with trying to hide something that wasn't occurring as expected. But let's suppose that even with everything I've just said, that you think that the chance of catastrophic climate change is very small. Well, there are such things as low probability, high impact events, where you may not think the chance of it happening is very good, but if it does, you are in big trouble. So there's a professor at MIT who I just respect incredibly, that I love his approach. He said, if there's a way to minimize the risk without harming people, why isn't that something we could all agree on? And by the way, if we cut into the profits of the multi-billion-dollar oil industry, I'm not going to consider that harming people. I'm sorry, but I think that everything in this world right now has become so binary. It's like, it's us, them. You can't be a member of the other party and be respected as a human being. And it goes both ways. I remember a time, and I'll stop after this, when Ronald Reagan was president and Tip O'Neill was Speaker of the House. I just saw a video on this the other day. There was a dinner honoring Tip O'Neill, and Ronald Reagan was invited to speak. They couldn't have been more different politically.
Totally opposite.
But they respected each other as human beings. And they had dinners together. Their spouses and so forth got together. And they would talk things out. And I don't see much of that anymore.
I agree.
And I think it's criminal. Where the commonality we have as Americans ought to come first. And it's okay to have different opinions about things. Maybe we all have the same goal. It's just that we have different ideas about how to get there. That's okay. That's all right.
Well, especially on climate, isolationism and denying is something that it's detrimental, because ultimately at the end of the day, it's going to affect everything and everybody on the planet.
Right.
And different countries, as you know, there's international committees that's been put together to look at this and bring this information out. But there seems to be, and again, I like your point, but there seems to be these kind of extreme weather things that are happening. And I know I've seen things in the past. I remember Hurricane Hazel, believe it or not, when I was a little boy, which was pretty traumatic. I mean, it decimated everything.
Sure.
So, kind of giving you the opportunity to say, how do we convince people that are in that silo that don't want to hear, and how do we move it forward? I don't know.
And the thing that you just brought up, they would use as an argument that, hey, 70 years ago, almost 70 years ago, we had a bad hurricane with Hazel, so the weather just keeps repeating itself. And there's truth to that.
Sure.
There are natural cycles and so forth, but and nobody that I know of ever said that there would be more hurricanes because of global warming.
Right.
This professor up at MIT has said that the strongest of the hurricanes will probably become more intense because they thrive on warm water. But there are a lot of things that have been claimed, like, oh, you said that the tornadoes were going to get bigger. There's been no discernible trend in the number of tornadoes in recent years, but I don't know of any credible scientists that predicted that. I think there are people that are on the quote unquote side of climate change that have hyped it to the point where now they're not trusted anymore. And I think we need to be really, really careful about that. Don't immediately attribute climate change to every weird thing that goes on with the weather, because some of it would have happened anyways.
Right.
And like I said, we've got to try to figure out a way to separate out that and see what we have left. And what it appears we have left is a definitive upward trend. One other thing, and I did a story on this years ago, where let's say you have a sine wave represent the natural cycles in climate, okay, or in the weather. And then you say, okay, the CO2 is steadily increasing. Well, if you combine those two graphs where both of them are going up, then you're going to have warming, okay?
Absolutely.
But there's going to be times where the CO2 is going up, but the natural cycle is going down, and they cancel each other. And if you look at the last 40 years, you actually see a little bit of a stair-step pattern there, where it increases a lot, sort of levels off, increases a lot. And when we get into these flat zones, people say, oh, there's no warming for the last 10 years. True. But what's the trend over the last 50 or 60 years?
Right. It's a doorstep kind of thing.
Yes. Exactly.
This is literally a topic that I'd like to carry on, and I'm going to do this on air. I'm going to invite you back.
I'd love to.
And let's talk about that. And because I know I'm going to get a lot of feedback, I'd like to have that discussion more. And at some point in time, we may get you and Nick Petro to come in and sit down and have a conversation.
That would be a blast.
Because to me, this is something that affects everybody, especially in an agricultural area. We're seeing a lot of change, a lot of dynamic, and things doing different. But I do want to thank you for taking your time coming in today and having this conversation. And I think we've created over the past few days and weeks here kind of a bond that'll allow us to communicate and maybe get you back in the studio. Plus, it'll give me time to kind of get some feedback from the population. Right. And I look forward at some point in time to have this conversation. And I don't know that we can talk about it too much. Right. I think we can talk about it too little. So again, thank you for being with us, and thank you for taking time.
And I would just say one thing real quick, if we have just a second here, is that I honestly believe that cable news channels, talk radio, and social media have played a major role in dividing this country and making us forget about the fact that we're all Americans.
Absolutely.
And I think they thrive on creating that division, to be honest with you. So I would just advise everybody to be careful of that.
Absolutely. Thank you for being with us. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. We look forward to seeing you again next week, and may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host JW Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.